Okay, welcome to the Hard Sell with me, your host, Joel Stevenson. For those of us joining for the first time, the idea of the show is whether you work as a salesperson or not, we all end up selling things. And so what we're trying to do here is peel back the curtain on sales, if you will, to help people understand it better and be more effective, whether you're a salesperson or working with a sales team or leading an organization or just trying to sell yourself. So that's what we do here on the show. And today we got a great guest to address the knowledge side of selling, which I'm going to explain in a moment. But Ira Bernstein is the founder and CEO of RAMPT Consulting, which I'll have him describe in a moment. And prior to RAMPT, Ira spent a career in the trenches of sales and sales enablement at Cisco, Citrix, Workiva, and others. Ira and I have known each other for a while, and he's a great guy to talk about sales. So, Ira, welcome to the Hard Sell.
Joel, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, great. So maybe just as give everybody a little bit of background on RAMPT and what you guys do over there and the problems you're trying to solve.
Yeah, so, I started my own consulting practice about 6 years ago. It's probably not too, we probably met not too far after that, I think the first year after. And, initially I had started this business with the idea of building onboarding programs for fast-growing startups for their sales organizations. They usually don't have enablement, and so they have no one really creating a scalable training program. And when you start getting your, A, B, and C rounds, the scaling happens quick. So that was kind of my initial, I guess, hypothesis and set of things that I was doing. And really over the years, it's really transformed into much more around selling skills, how to more effectively understand customers, how to really just be more effective from a personal level on the selling skills side, and from businesses really how to produce results that are outperforming.
Right.
So that's kind of where most of my time is nowadays.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I imagine with that remit, you're a pretty busy guy. Certainly the sales is the sort of thing where like it's not really taught in school. I mean, I think there are a few university programs out there, but for the most part, it's almost seemingly more of an apprenticeship model these days, which brings us to the first question, which is somebody who has trained a lot of salespeople over time, and has worked as a salesperson and sort of worked inside of organizations of varying different sizes. There's this old thing. I don't know, whether you'd call it an old wives' tale or not. It's one of these old saws around sales. It's like, well, salespeople are born, not made, or do you believe that salespeople are made, not born? And so I'm curious what your perspective is, having done this a lot. Like, what do you think about that question?
Well, it's an interesting one. Before I answer, I do want to go back to one thing you mentioned about sales being something that you don't really see in colleges or in university systems. What's interesting is what I've started to see over the last 5-10 years is that universities are starting to create these types of programs. They may be certificates, they may be minors. I know the University of Texas at Dallas has a program. Actually, my alma mater, University of Delaware, go Blue Hens, just started their own a couple years ago as well. So it's starting to happen. But when you think about the history of business and sales, it does seem like the universities are a little bit late to the game. But to answer your question, obviously it's not really a simple answer, but being that the program I train on is called Selling Through Curiosity. If you think about it from a lens of curiosity, and I do firmly believe curious people make more effective sales professionals. Just genuinely curious people. They want to learn about their customers, their prospects. So when it's are they born or made, I want us all to think about when we were 3 years old and our parents said, don't do something. And as a kid, you say, well, why? And it's always the thing we all laugh about as parents, right? Why? And so I would argue we're all born with that inherent curiosity. I think over the years, through nurture, nature, and a lot of other things, and just growing up, our curiosity kind of wanes. So it may be a more philosophical answer, but I think we're all born capable of being effective salespeople. I think that all of us can be trained and I would say reminded of what makes effective salespeople effective. And it is in those skills. We just sometimes don't practice them. And oftentimes we think we're using them when we're actually not.
Right. So maybe let's talk a little bit more about like specifically the sales training aspect of that. So, there are various ways to learn about selling. Certainly there's a number of books. There's courses. There's, as we mentioned, there's sort of like the apprenticeship model where you just kind of learn in the trenches. But if somebody wanted to make an investment in a program like selling through curiosity, what like how should somebody think about that? Like what they're going to get out of that investment?
Yeah.
And like or even like what they're going to have to put into it to get something out of it.
Sure. So I think when I try to put myself in the mindset of a sales leader, a business owner, someone who is thinking about this, I think the first thing to do is to really think about and really inspect what is the sales process and not only sales process but the buying process actually look like, right? How do those interactions ideally happen? And how sales cycle, how much time you spending with them through that process, because I do believe that what your sales process and buying process looks like is important to then understand where are your gaps, right? I mean, the reality is you're trying to, most companies are trying to fix something when they think about sales training. So I think it's really important to first be able to, look at yourself, your company, your sales organization, and kind of see what is not happening that ideally should be happening for us to create the results we want. And so, oftentimes what we're missing, what isn't there, what needs to change will drive some type of training or skills-based development. So I think that's kind of the first thing. And the second thing is, what is the type of training that you want to get? Is this a refresher on a specific skill? Are you looking to actually transform the way you do business and your selling motion? So I think that, there's two degrees of that, kind of two ends of that spectrum, and then kind of in the middle, I think what you just asked about, commitment. The reality is anything that's just that you're going to spend a couple hours refreshing your time on, it's really, really low probability to create results. So I think there is a question to the business owner, the sales leader, and to the team in terms of what is the level of commitment that you're willing to prioritize to learning these new skills, because behavior change isn't easy. And the reality is if we, like you said, read a ton of sales books, they don't change behavior. They give you more knowledge, but they don't really infuse the actual behavior changes that create the results you want. I mean, I'll use a perfect example. And I think we've talked about this before, Joel. The first sales book I ever read, Spin Selling. Loved the book. The problem is that how do I take this knowledge, like all this stuff makes sense to me, how do I actually take that and apply it in a way that's effective? And that's the real hard transition when it comes to sales, from reading and knowledge to actual execution, in the field, whether it's face-to-face, virtually, any of those types of things.
And have you seen examples of people that have sort of, gotten the knowledge and put in the work and gotten sort of these feedback cycles to get better and better, where it has made a big difference either on the individual's results or the organization's results?
Yeah. When I see, there's nothing that's perfect, but when I see success, it usually has a couple common themes to it. Number one, whether it's business owner or sales leader, they're bought in. they have made a decision and are going to commit to it. And it's not just in their words, but in their actions. So, one of the things I always, strongly encourage if at all possible, is everyone attends the training, not just the sales reps. Because think about it. If I was a sales rep, and I was for many, many years, carrying a quota, and I'm going through a training that is supposed to be, we're spending hours of time, thousands of dollars, and the person who's leading it or my manager doesn't have to attend, what does that say to me as a sales rep, right? Is it really that important, right? I like to use the saying, and it's not mine, if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. So you got to prioritize it. And that may mean that either you need to change priorities in other parts of the business or even wait for the training. But it's got to be the right time to invest the time, because that's when you're going to get the actual, the change in the impacts that you want. The second is making sure that after you go through this type of training, how do you continue to reinforce it? How do you coach to it? There's so many dynamics around it that, if you just put people through a training, you're still putting all of the ownership on the sales rep to figure it out, right? So it really is sales training in and of itself. You want to really think about it in a much more broad base around how do we do, it's a change management type of exercise you're going through. So you really need to be thinking about what happens after you come out of this training. What are my managers going to do differently, right? Because the reality is, if you teach someone, Joel, to sell in a certain way, and that person's manager is still coaching them the way they did before, you're gonna have a real big conflict, right? And then it impacts everyone.
Yeah, that's right. I've certainly seen that across different organizations over time. And you had mentioned a little bit about some of the things that try to understand is like what's the buying process and what's the selling process as a starting point for a lot of these things. And one part that I think has sort of changed for everybody lately is due to COVID. Like both the buying process and the selling process has changed out of necessity. And like, what are some of the things that you've seen in terms of maybe the skill gaps that are now required to be successful that are maybe missing in organizations that people need to take a look at and see if they're sort of up to snuff on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've been really fortunate, Joel, in that my first few sales roles were working for web conferencing companies. So I worked for WebEx, owned by Cisco now. I worked for GoToMeeting, now owned by LogMeIn. And so for the last decade, the concept of interacting and building relationships virtually through web meetings, web conferencing, and video conferencing, it's a norm for me, right? So, and I admit, there are times I take it for granted. And so I think the first thing fundamentally is to make sure that your sales organization understands the tools they have available to them. And as silly as it may sound, many people I still see either aren't sharing their webcams when they're in a meeting, or they're in a setup that really isn't conducive to building relationships and getting to know a person. And I get COVID has changed a lot in terms of dynamics. People's offices are now living rooms at times, but there's got to be some level of professionalism in the sense of how do you want your prospects and customers to think of you and the interactions with you when you're interacting. So for me, I have a peel and stick whiteboard. I think, Joel, you've seen it before on my wall that I can write on that someone can see right through a webcam. Someone can see my face when I'm talking to people. I'm looking straight ahead at the camera or at my monitor. I don't have it off to the side. So audio, right? Are you just using a headset? Are you using speakerphone? My belief is, fundamentally everyone should have a really solid headset that's not going to deal with interference so that people can hear you clearly. all of those things, I think many people oftentimes make the mistake of saying that, the meeting didn't go well because technology wasn't working well. But the reality is I've been using web meeting products for a long time. More or less, they work. Typically, when there's an issue, it's an issue on a user's side. And so I think first and foremost, sales professionals who are selling virtually need to make sure that they're giving the best first impression as possible. No different than if they're meeting face to face. There just happens to be a lot of components to making that happen. But if you really kind of make an inventory of those things, you're going to start conversations in a much better path moving forward. So that's one thing. Two, I think the use of video in kind of in between meeting interactions is something that's fairly underutilized, and there's a lot of companies out there. Vidyard does some good stuff with this. Loom, I use Loom just personally, and instead of sending an email, sometimes I just send a video message, and it's not produced. It's just, hey, record myself so that they can hear me, my tone, my inflection, me looking at them, as opposed to words on a screen. They just don't have as much meaning as something that is more interactive. So I think it's just realizing that sales is still a human-to-human process, right? I mean, although there's plenty of technologies there that are helping to mitigate as much human-to-human interaction, still at the end, if your sale requires human-to-human interaction, you just got to be as prepared for a consistent experience every time. Fundamental.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I guess, you referenced a number of tools, and I think one of the things that, we hear from sales teams, of course, we are in some sense I guess in every sense a tools provider at Yesware, but you can only, no matter how much money you have, you do have limited time. And so sales people and sales managers have to make a decision about, when do I invest in sales tools or sales technology versus just core selling skills like getting better at a discovery call or getting better with follow-up. Like how do you feel about the thinking through those trade-offs and when it might be the right time to invest in one versus the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to think about is, what are you trying to improve? If you're a business owner, if you're a sales leader, what is it that's not working now that, if it was working, will get you on a better track? My feeling about tools in general, and by the way, I am a Yesware customer. I use it heavily. I love the product. One of the things that Yesware provides me, just as an example, is the ability to send out a link with my availability, and someone can book, through email. And although that may sound like something small, in the world of sales, sometimes just getting the appointment and calendar locked in, it's not just time. It doesn't just extend the sales cycle. It's mental energy that could be focused on something else. And I use that as an example because I chose I realized I had this need because I was spending hours trying to schedule over the week. And what I realized is that is time that is just wasted. So, I look at tools as a way to increase efficiency and reduce waste. So if there are places in your organization, in your sales process, and what you're doing that you can identify are wasteful, and that has a real impact in whether it's just straight dollars and cents or time selling, tools are a fantastic way to try to solve them. But in the end, once you get to that first conversation where you're talking with a customer, the tools, I don't want to say they go out the door, because obviously if we're doing it via web conferencing, we're using things like Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting. But tools are kind of the efficiency mechanism and the way to speed things up. The skills are really all about when push comes to shove and you're communicating with a prospect or customer, how do you understand them better than anybody else? So that's where the skills come in. Because and it's interesting. I listened to your last fireside with Scott Sims. He was talking about 50% of performance. The data shows that it can be determined by territory, and there's a whole bunch of places where there are things that are outside of the control of the sales rep. But fundamentally, what we can control is how we communicate and learn from our customers. And to me, that is the place where salespeople do make their living. That's what makes them different from a good sales professional versus one who's subpar. It's all about communication skills. It's all about those selling skills that impact your effectiveness there. So that's kind of the separation I would use.
Yeah, and I feel like I probably should have asked you this earlier, and I'm quite certain I know what you're going to say. But if you're a rep and you're sitting there saying like I want to get better at one part of the selling process. So if you were to think about a selling process of starting like from the first discovery call all the way through to demonstrations and proposals and closing and all that type of stuff. If there's one place to focus and get better at, what's that place, do you think, and why?
I think it's your questioning skills. I think it's questioning skills for sure. And there's a number of reasons why. First off, most companies that I talk to, it's pretty obvious that they're not asking a lot of questions. They're telling, to use all the fun cliches, telling, not selling, and so they're telling people all about their product, their company, maybe even doing a demo, and they don't even know anything about the customer because oftentimes there's someone else who's booking the appointment for them. So I think when you talk about where you should focus on, my thinking would be, what is it that a perfect customer would be telling you about their business that would help you understand whether or not you can help them? What is that information? And based off of that information, what are the questions? What are the most effective questions that you can ask to get them talking about it? It's actually, and I don't want to say it's not complicated, but it is fairly straightforward. Now, the questions you first write, you need to have someone really kind of inspecting that and saying, are they going to answer that question in the way you want? But I think most times salespeople are so quick to just hop right into things that they don't think about what they're actually asking. And typically, the most common questions that are asked are all about giving a proposal, right? How many people do you have? How many widgets do you need? What's the agreement that you need it for? When do you want to get started? Like, all of these questions help you get out a proposal and a quote. They surely don't help you understand, why are they talking to you? What are they trying to solve for? And by the way, if you can help them solve it, what's the benefit to their business? Those are the questions that matter.
Right. Yeah. And I tend to think of that as the sort of the highest and best use of the salesperson. In a world where there's more and more information and more people want to buy self-service, there's a set of low value transactions that probably don't need a salesperson, but when you need a salesperson, you really need one. And the beauty of a salesperson is the ability to coordinate the resources of one company with the needs of another. And we haven't figured out a way to automate that yet. And so I think I think the only way to really do that effectively is to, as you say, like, be really good at asking questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you say that. I mean, there's a lot of organizations, especially in the more technical type sales, that have multiple resources that are leveraged in the sales process. Sometimes people, reps have a solutions engineer, a solutions architect that's on a lot of calls, or brought in. But to me, it's one thing I've seen in the last 10 to 15 years it's just been so apparent to me is that most organizations, they team sell in a fashion of, this is your role, this is my role, stay in the swim lanes. And the reality is if you bring a technical resource in to do something, that's what they're going to do. But if you haven't asked the customer, if you don't really understand the customer, what you've asked that technical resource to do may not even be important, may not even be impactful. And by the way, if you can't communicate to that resource, that teammate, what are the goals of this meeting? What are they trying to accomplish? And give your team members the ability to learn as well with the customer. I think you're spinning a lot of wheels. You're wasting a lot of time.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, and not only your time but your customer's time, which is
Totally.
Probably even worse.
Yeah, I mean that's that. It would be really interesting to have some statistical analysis on on how many people walk into a demo as a prospect or customer where they're bringing a technical resource and walk out saying, I didn't learn what I needed to learn. It didn't align to me, right? The reality is most people, I think, don't really want to get the same generic demo that everyone else gives. Although many sales reps are taught, do it this way.
Yeah, right. The sort of the pull of sort of the more custom bespoke process versus the one that is sort of tried and true and just do it this way, more predictable, I suppose. Yeah,
and the reality is if you have something you're selling that is simple, straightforward, the need is clear, the requirements of customers are identical, that may not, giving a very standard generic demo may be an effective way to run your sales business. But if you have any complexity, if you have anything of material value, dollars and cents wise, if it's really going to be something that they need to justify this purchase instead of $300 or $500 a year, if we're talking about 30, 40, 50,000 and above, right? They're not just going to be, person's usually not going to be just saying, hey, yes, send me over the agreement, I'll do it today, right? There are more steps in the process, which, by the way, probably one of the weaker areas that salespeople get into or don't get into, I should say, is how companies make decisions. It's a under leveraged topic. It's not asked a lot, and that's where deals fall apart.
Yeah, right. Particularly in companies that have large and sort of complicated buying committees, we certainly see that a lot. Whether it's like you just lose the deal because you didn't navigate it right, or you misforecast it, or who knows what sort of negatives could befall you in that world. But there's a lot of them. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there was actually, and I won't name names. I saw a post on LinkedIn last week by someone in, I would consider, the same industry as what I do, and it was an interesting post because the moral of the person's story was, don't let things that you can't control you, right, and get in your way. And the story that he wrote on the post was essentially, they had a huge customer. They were getting down to the wire. The customer asked for a whole bunch of concessions. The company said yes. And then at the end, they didn't get the deal. And when they asked why, they said, you weren't as convenient to work with, right? I wanted someone more local. And, the first thing that came to my mind is, well, why didn't we ask about what's important to them in the ideal partner, right? We can look at situations in many different ways, but most of the time, I firmly believe customers want to share with us what we want to know. We just don't ask the question in a way that's going to get it. And so we start pointing, we salespeople start pointing fingers and saying they lied to us, they didn't tell us this information. If they don't know it's critical, they're not going to tell you. But if we ask, they may just share with us, and then we get the information we need.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to wrap this up in a minute because we're starting to run out of time. But I will maybe end with an anecdote from the buyer side of that, which was I did a brief stint in finance at my last company, and we bought a very expensive forecasting system, and we sort of talked to all of the, people that were the leaders in that space at the time, and and having been a technology salesperson, I was like not pulling punches. I was just trying to be as upfront as I could with people and and sort of get the people, get sort of the answers, and run as clean of a process as we could. And one of the companies involved actually would have been the best solution. And especially in retrospect, I was sort of sad that we didn't choose them, but they ran such a horrifically bad sales process that we just couldn't pick them. And a lot of the reason it was so bad was because they convinced themselves that we were out to get them. Based on some of the conversations that were had in some of the chain of events. But if they had really just asked the right set of questions, or at least been open to hearing what the answers were to those questions, then trying to work with us, like it never would have happened. But they sold themselves out of a deal that they definitely should have won. It's really bizarre.
The example that you're giving right now, Joel, I think is one, not uncommon. And two, I think it does shed light onto, oftentimes as sales professionals, we let a lot of bad experiences, negative experiences, change how we act with people in new sales processes. And the reality is there's always going to be there's always going to be the fun customers to work with. There's always going to be some that are a bit more challenging. But in the end, how do I be as effective as I can and understand my customer better than anybody else? And if you can do that, the story you just gave and many others, they kind of just fall, those just go away. Most of the stuff falls into place because you've done the work, you've asked the questions, and then you have the ability to say, great, we have a great solution for you. Let's kind of talk about how we can help you accomplish this. Or, you know what? Because you told me all this information, we may not be the right fit for you, and that's okay. So, yeah, and I think those are obviously the big things that we want to avoid, right? Is having, the product isn't the reason why you didn't buy. It was the people. I mean, and I think we said it at the beginning of this discussion. That's where we make the difference in sales. Yeah. We make it easy for them to buy. So if we're making it difficult, we're doing the opposite effect.
Yeah, so let's try to not do that going forward. Well, Ira, we're running close to time here, but we normally give people a chance to ask questions, and so if folks have any questions, you can think of them now, and you can either put them in the chat, or you can ask to be invited to stage, and we'll bring you up. But while people are thinking about if they have any questions, if people want to learn more about RAMPT and what you do, or sales training, or selling through curiosity, or any of that stuff, what's the best way to find out about that, or be in touch?
Yeah, so the company is called RAMPT with a T, so RAMPT Consulting. So it's ramptconsulting.com. You can just send an email. The easiest way is to me, Ira, I-R-A, @ramptconsulting.com, and schedule some time to talk.
Great. And I'm not seeing any questions at this point, so we're gonna let you off early, or easy rather. And yeah, it was great to chat as always, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
All right, thanks so much, Joel. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.